every one of the services has a purpose and a capability that is not replicated in any one of the other services. I served with a number of Marines over the years, and I hope none of them are listening, because it pains me to think that they'd hear me say something nice about them. If there is one theme that is overriding, it's this concept of being surrounded by really good people. If this pisses off some of your listeners, I'm sorry, I'm just going to piss them off. This was a war on white males, white Christian males in particular. The point of impact of that flight was about 100 yards away from where we were standing.
Wow.
So it said, those bastards that attacked my country did not shut the Pentagon down for even a day. And the answer that I always give is, yes, there is something sadder than that, and that is if we forget.
Welcome to another edition of No Holds Barred. I'm Rich Roth, and my guest today, Major General Scott West. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Rich. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Appreciate you being here with me. We've got a lot to talk about. You're a retired Major General. You are retired, right?
I am, yes, sir.
You're going back and forth from everything.
Well, I'm retired from the Army, but I don't tell people I'm retired in that sense, because every time I tell someone I'm retired, I find myself working again. So I just tell people I'm unemployed, and that seems to be working really well.
So do you want to be retired?
I do. We're kind of my wife and I was just telling Mary that my wife Patty and I are in our 50th year. We'll celebrate 50 years of marriage. Thank you. Next June. And we're kind of at that stage where we're ready to be retired. And there are plenty of things that keep me busy in retirement. So it's not like I'm just sitting around watching Oprah reruns. That wouldn't quite be my style anyway, but plenty to do, and we can talk in greater detail.
Yeah, we absolutely will. And retired Major General in the Army. Let's start there. I don't know a ton about the armed forces in terms of all the ranks, and I was actually looking it up earlier, and Major General sounds really, really, impressive. And then I looked, and there were a couple ranks ahead. So,
sure,
General is above Major General. Like, how does that all work?
Yeah. So, and it's a ranking order that ties back to European armies, and I won't get into all those details. But from top to bottom, the highest ranking officer in the Army is a general. That's a 4-star, and it's just general is the title. And then you have a lieutenant general who serves in lieu of the general.
Okay.
So that's a 3-star. Then a major general is a 2-star, and a brigadier general is a 1-star.
Okay, I gotcha.
And the other branches have similar ranks. The Navy calls their flag officers different. You have an admiral and a vice admiral, rear admiral, upper half, and a rear admiral. That's a little confusing, not so much to the Navy folks. They kind of get that, but upper half and lower half always kind of throws me off track a little bit.
And as far as the Navy goes, how do you feel about the Navy?
Well,
let's just jump right in.
It's a loaded question. There's great service rivalry, and it's all in good fun. Sometimes there are people who get carried away with it a little bit in the Army, and about Army-Navy football time, it ramps up pretty good. But all joking aside, every one of the services has a purpose and a capability that is not replicated in any one of the other services. The Marines have infantry, and the Army has infantry. And someone would say, well, how is that different? And at the tactical level, it may not be all that different. They move, shoot, communicate very similarly with one another. But in terms of where they do it and for how long do they do it, the Marines aren't designed to go in and stay for long periods of time. They're a littoral combat force. They go in and get things done on the ground very quickly. And then you need a force with a little more staying power, read greater strength and perhaps more capabilities to come in there and continue stabilizing situation over time. So back to the Navy. Everybody on this planet benefits from what the United States Navy does because they guarantee freedom of navigation. No other country out there could do it. If there was another country out somewhere on the face of the globe that could guarantee freedom of navigation, they would be out there doing it, the Chinese in particular. And yet it's...
Explain freedom of navigation.
Okay, so about 90% of everything that moves on this globe moves by water, right?
Okay.
All goods and a lot of services and what have you. And we sustain life from seafood and aquaculture and just all manner of things that everybody on Earth benefits from. You couldn't enjoy that benefit if the shipping lanes were chock full of pirates that had evil intent on stealing or sinking or otherwise executing very nefarious activities out there. And so you have to, in order for this global commerce to be moving, you have to have some assured freedom of navigation. And the United States Navy does that. They also bring just tremendous capabilities to warfighting, capabilities that the Army doesn't have, capabilities that the Air Force doesn't have, capabilities the Marines don't have. And people will say, well, the Air Force has got all those planes, Navy's got a lot of planes, far different in their mission. And they have different skills and different mission sets when it comes to joint warfighting as well.
So what you're telling me is that the Navy does more than just drive you guys to wars.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the jokes, though,
yeah.
Right? I mean, you guys all have jokes for each other.
Oh, we do, yeah. Absolutely. And
I need to hear a couple of.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Every time I've got a great relationship with a lot of Marines. I served with a number of Marines over the years. And I hope none of them are listening because it pains me to think that they'd hear me say something nice about them. I've got one friend, a dear friend, who was my deputy when I was in Iraq. And he's a retired Marine colonel. He was a serving colonel at the time. His name's Dennis Arenello. And every time I see Denny, I go, hey, Denny, you guys put old Harry Truman in the Marine Corps Hall of Fame yet? And then there are a number of expletives, and he cleanses his palate. And if you don't know the story, back in the day, and I don't know, it was when Truman was the president, someone had mentioned the Marine Corps, and Harry, President Truman, who had been a soldier in World War I, said, Marines, said, as far as I'm concerned, they're just shipboard cops. Well, I will remind my Marine friends that, I think Harry had it right. You guys are shipboard cops. And of course, they're anything but that. They are an elite and very capable fighting force. But you got to poke a little fun
got to.
at them. Just like with the Navy and the Air Force and the Coast Guard. And sadly, the Space Force came around after I retired, so I haven't developed a repertoire of wit to other than the obvious, Guardians of the Galaxy and Space Cadets and what have you. But the next big one, the winner, if there is a winner in the next global conflict, is going to be the force that dominates space. And whether that will be the nation that dominates space, whether that will be the United States or not remains to be seen. But if it is the United States, it'll be the Space Force that brings that to bear. So,
how did you get involved in the Army? What precipitated?
Well, my father had served in the Army during World War II. In fact, he used to joke. People would say, "Well, you're a veteran." This is when I was a little kid and hanging around my father, and people would say, "You're a veteran, aren't you?" He goes, "Oh yeah," and they'd get this look on their face and go, "Where'd you serve?" And he'd kind of squint and lean towards him, and he would say, "I served in the hellhole of San Francisco." and then my father would just roar with laughter. He got such a kick out of telling that. But he got drafted in the summer of 1941. If you know your history, we were not yet in the war, but it was very clear. It wasn't going to be much longer before we had to be a part of this world war. And they trained him in those days. When you went in the Army, and keep in mind, this is a force that went from about 280,000 people in 1939 to about a little over 10 million just in the Army. There were a total of 15 point some odd million serving at the height of World War II, but in a very short period of time. So everybody went through basic training, but you did not go to any specialty training. They sent you out into the Army to get your specialty training. And he was today we would call him a physician's assistant. He didn't have the medical background that a PA would have today, but he was would do things. And his job, it ended up, was he ran a gymnasium at the Presidio of San Francisco, which sitting on the Presidio was Letterman General Hospital, Army hospital. And eventually his job was to oversee the rehabilitation exercises for veterans coming out of the Pacific Theater. And so, you go where you're told to go. You do what you're told to do, and everybody that served a purpose. And if you remember the movie Patton, when he's given that rah-rah speech in front of the big flag. Have you seen the movie?
I have
Patton?
not. No,
What?
I have not.
Oh yeah. Okay. So your homework assignment is to watch Patton, especially on a rainy day. But in the movie, he's standing in front of, in all of his regalia, standing in front of this American flag that's about the size of Long Island. It's just a huge flag, and he's giving this speech and to his troops, and he says, after you've fought this war and years from now you're bouncing your grandchildren on your knee and they look at you and they say, "Grandpa, what did you do during the Great War?" You won't have to tell them that you shoveled shit in St. Louis. And of course that's kind of a famous line, but I used to tell my dad, you were drafted in the Army. They sent you to San Francisco. Obviously, that's where the Army felt they needed you to be, and you should be very proud of your service. He says, "Well, I'm proud that I served and answered the call." He said, "Frankly, I think the Army sent me there and then forgot me," which, of course, things could have been one heck of a lot worse. But he did remind me that wartime in San Francisco, he said, "Son, there were a lot of days I had to remind myself there was a war going on." Because life in San Francisco, even in the 43, 44, 45 time frame, was still pretty sweet by standards.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet he didn't realize how prophetic he was being when he said the hellhole that is San Francisco, because nowadays.
Today, yeah. So back to my little story. So when I was just a couple weeks away from graduating high school, my father asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I've decided I'm going to go in the Air Force. I had wanted to be an airborne infantryman in the Army. And this was 1972, and the war in Vietnam wasn't exactly over, but we had stopped sending combat forces into Vietnam and at that point in time, and the Army was downscaling considerable. And the recruiter, when I went to see the recruiter, he said, well, I don't have any requirements for infantrymen, let alone airborne infantrymen, where they would send you to school to become a paratrooper. And I was pretty disappointed. And of course, all the recruiters were in the same office. And this Air Force recruiter grabbed me on the way out and said, so you couldn't find what you wanted in the Army? And I said, well, I'll come back. And he said, well, you want to jump out of airplanes? And I said, I do. I want to become a paratrooper. He said, well, I can
I can help.
I can get you airborne qualified. He said, how are your eyes? I said, well, they're corrected to 20/20. He said, well, you have to have actual perfect 20/20 vision to be what the Air Force calls a PJ. These are their parachute rescue folks that the airborne medics, right? And they're designed to do a lot of things, but they parachute in to help recover downed airmen, airplanes that get shot down, and other uses. But he said, but you could become a combat controller. And what's a combat controller? And he showed me pictures. There were no videos in those days,
right.
1972. So he had a book of pictures, and it looked pretty cool. And they wore a red beret and the jump wings, and he had pictures of parachutes. And so I was going to sign up, and I was literally a stroke away from enlisting. And my father said, son, what are you going to do? I said, Dad, I'm going to enlist in the Air Force. He said, boy, your mom and I sure would like you to think about going to college.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to understand, no kid in America ever had better parents than the ones I had. I mean, my mom and dad were really class people, not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they were just really good parents.
Mm-hmm.
And all of my siblings, none of them had gone. I had 2 brothers and a sister. None of them had gone to college. They had opted to go into the workforce. And he was a college graduate, courtesy of the Army and the GI Bill following World War II. And so he said, so you're going to, why do you want to go in the Air Force? And I told him, and he kind of leaned and he said, did I mention that your mother and I sure would love to see you give college a try? So he said, I'll make a deal with you. You go to college for 1 semester. I'd been accepted at Eastern Washington State College, which was his alma mater. Now, don't be too impressed, because I think every kid that applied to go to Eastern Washington got accepted. But if you were a kid in the West family and you were going to go to college, you were probably going to end up at Eastern, right? This was a little college just outside of Spokane, about 100 miles from the town I grew up in. And he said, I'll if you will agree to go for a semester.
Right.
If you like it, stay, and I'll cover the cost of your college. And if you don't like it, he said, I will come pick you up and take you to the recruiter. And I said, okay. Of course, I'd been on campus for about a half an hour before I realized there was beer and young ladies there, so, what's not to like?
Right.
And of course,
did you like it too much?
I will tell you that a year, this was in September of 72. In February of 73, 6 months later, mm-hmm. I'm sitting on a grade point average that began with a 0 point, and there might have even been another 0 just to the right of the decimal point. I was sure I was there on a beer drinking scholarship, And I woke up one morning and I knew the draft numbers were coming out in the local newspaper, the Spokesman Review, Spokane, Washington newspaper. And I didn't get the newspaper delivered, but my next door neighbor got it. So I sneaked over and found out my draft number was 3. And with a draft number of 3, it's the only lottery I ever won. But with a draft number of 3 and a grade point average like mine, there would have been no point for a draft board to say, let's give this kid a deferment. He's just wasting his
great. He's ready.
His parents'
Let's go.
family. And so I had taken a military science course through the ROTC department there in the fall of the year. And I didn't have a commitment to them.
Was that the class you passed?
Well, yeah. In fact, I did quite well because I really enjoyed it, and it was a lot of it was military history, and mm-hmm. I describe myself as a student of history. I'm neither an historian nor am I a history buff, but I define myself as a student of
Okay.
of history. I went down to the ROTC department. I tell people I ran to the ROTC department, might have been wearing my bedroom slippers as I ran along to see if I couldn't get signed up with a commitment where you would commit to accepting a commission. And this was going to be a stretch because of that grade point average. I mean, the ROTC guys looking at me saying, yeah, let's sign this guy up, would have been throwing good money after bad.
Right.
On that deal. But they took a chance on me. And
so was this to avoid being drafted?
yeah, so I had absolutely no qualms about serving.
But choosing to go in is different than being drafted to go in.
That's right.
Okay.
And so
What's the difference?
well, at that point in time, so if you were to be drafted in 73, it was a little bit different. But if you were drafted in like 1968 or 69, it's about a 99% chance that you were going to be an infantryman in Vietnam.
Okay.
And if you, and it was a 2-year commitment, you were drafted for 2 years. They would send you to basic training, and you're in the Army, what they called advanced individual training, in this case to become an infantryman. Mm-hmm. And then you'd spend a year or 13 months. Earlier in the war, the tours were 13 months, and they scaled them back to 12-month tours. And I think that they kind of largely did that so you didn't miss 2 of everything, the potential of missing 2 birthdays, 2 anniversaries. And it just lopping a month off of a tour like that would have seemed like you'd won the lottery there too. But
yeah.
So if you enlisted, if you
had more control over.
You had more control, more choices.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. My older brother, who's a year older than I am, he had his number was 4. So his draft lottery was the year before mine. He was 4, and I was number 3. This is the luck of the West family. But he decided to go. He claims to this day that he enlisted to become an MP, a military policeman, and but he did not get that in writing, and he ended up as an infantryman. And when he went through basic training, they were all heading to Vietnam. Mm. And just as he was coming out of basic training, they stopped sending combat forces into Vietnam. He ended up in Panama and did 8 years in the Army, and then decided to get out. But so I got into ROTC, and I really liked it. And I was surrounded by some really good people. That will be a theme as I tell you about my career. If there is one theme that is overriding, it's this concept of being surrounded by really good people.
So important, isn't it?
It is. And my wife, wonderful lady, if you knew Patty, you'd take an instant liking to her. She jokingly reminds me that I would probably be a retired first lieutenant if it wasn't for her. And she's not wrong there, her and, I'm a Christian, and I, the love of a merciful God that helped guide me along the way, and super parents, a great family, and a family that could tolerate, a wife and children that could tolerate a father and husband who was a career soldier. Mm. And that's not an easy, my wife made 21 moves during our time, 21 times that we packed up the household and moved, sometimes overseas, sometimes across the country. I drug her to Korea with me, Germany twice, Alaska. We were at Fort Ord, California on the Monterey Peninsula for 15 months, and the Army decided I'd had enough fun, and they shipped us up to Fairbanks, Alaska. Yeah. And here is a wife and children who are resilient enough to be able to withstand the rigors of that kind of a life. And because, if you're, the old saying, a happy wife, happy life,
I've
right?
heard that one.
So if at any time this woman had said, "Hey, West, I've had enough of this,"
Yeah, you're on your own.
Yeah, you're on your own. And I probably hoped I would have had the courage to kick the Army to the curb and pursued my marriage and my family, but it never came to that. She tolerated that kind of lifestyle.
So you were telling me, before we jumped on, a little bit of the background of what you did in the Army.
Yeah.
And I'm going to butcher this word, logistician.
Logistician. Yeah. So, and the reason I told you that little story is, I did 4 combat tours while I was in the military, not including, I had an 8-day experience that was like no other experience. I unfortunately was on duty in South Central L.A. during the Rodney King riots in 1992.
What was that like?
Oh, it was just terrible in terms of what's going on in your nation. I happened to be stationed at Fort Ord at that time in the 7th Infantry Division, and we got alerted to send a brigade, and I was one of the support troops. We got alerted to send a brigade into L.A. to assist. The city had become overwhelmingly violent in a just very short period, in a matter of hours. It was a tinderbox. And so we went in to augment the National Guard division that was on duty down there. And during our first night, the President Bush 41 federalized the National Guard, bringing them under the same authority and same rules, same Title 10 of the United States Code that active forces are under. And so we served with them, and they did a marvelous job assisting. The posse comitatus, the law prohibits the military from having power of arrest. So you can't really do law enforcement, but you can always go out and provide assistance to civil authorities. And in this case, we were assisting the firefighters and the law enforcement officers, and a lot of times just infantry squads, light infantry, armed, not pointing their weapons in a threatening way, but everybody knew they were armed, and walking the streets with a presence. In that case, it had a calming influence on the residents, and in pretty short order, law enforcement was able to deal with the things they need to deal with.
Scott, that kind of brings up a couple things. I mean, obviously, Rodney King was an awful long time ago and not a very pleasant time,
sure,
in our country. But it seems like we've been seeing a lot more of that type of stuff, recently. I mean, all the stuff in Minnesota, and then what was going on out west, and I mean, what we saw at the Capitol, even to a degree, and now with President Trump, sending forces into Washington D.C., and that seems to have worked really, really well. Comparable, perhaps, to what you experienced in terms of.
I have a little different opinion about that. Only it has worked well, but I'm not so sure that the exigency in Washington D.C. Any large city has a crime problem, and as far as crime rates going up or going down, that's all depends on who's doing the reporting.
Right.
I don't believe for a moment that crime rates in D.C. have gone down.
Really.
Well, I think they have since the introduction of the Guard.
Okay, right.
But the argument before that was we don't need Trump to bring the National Guard in because our crime rate of incidence of crime is at a 30-year low or whatever the claim was being made.
Right, because of the reporting, like you said, we're not counting misdemeanors.
Yeah, so you don't count this and you don't count that and you don't count anything that doesn't result in a conviction, and then your courts are overwhelmed. It's very easy to get lost in those numbers, right? Just as it is to say, well, crime's on the rise. If you expand the aperture of how you define crimes, then you could make a case for it. But
you have to compare apples to apples.
Sure,
is what you're saying, right?
That's right. But here's the difference with Los Angeles and D.C. or Memphis or Chicago or whatever's next is there was a city that city of Los Angeles, in particular South Central, heavily minority populated area with a lot of crime to begin with, and then this really bad riot breaks out, and it overwhelmed the law enforcement and firefighters and EMTs and all of your essential services were overwhelmed very, very quickly, to the point where the governor didn't have much choice but to bring in the National Guard, and the president to bring in this active duty force. And I was in an Army brigade. He brought in a lot more. The Navy certainly was involved. There were Marines on the street that came from Camp Pendleton, and so it was the whole of DOD that was involved in that thing. But you had to knock the flames down in firefighting terms to be able to get in and restore order. I don't think the violence in D.C. or any of these other cities, Chicago's as violent as any place in the world right now. I mean, it's an absolute war zone. But I don't think it has risen to the flashpoint that justifies taking. And it's not about not using the National Guard. It is about they're a precious commodity to their governors, and they're also a precious commodity when they're federalized under Title X to be used as part of the deterrent force, the defense force of the United States. And so, these people all have jobs, and when we activate them to go to the Texas border or to Chicago or D.C., I think the National Guard has like 250,000 people in it. And so when you're burning up the days that are allocated, and if you activate them for 6 months, don't hold me on this, but by law there are some limitations. When a Guard soldier has been activated for a period of time, he or she can't be activated again for like 2 years or 3 years or whatever. So you should be very, very judicious. Our president and the whole of government should be very judicious in how they use the National Guard. If not, you'll burn through those days, and then when you need them, you won't have them. And that's the argument I would make.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Major General Scott West joining me here on No Holds Barred, and I'm going to butcher it again. Logistician, yeah. All right.
Or if it makes you comfortable, the combat arms guys, the infantry guys, used to just call us loggies.
Loggie.
Yeah, you were a loggie.
What did you do?
When I accepted a commission in the Army, I had wanted to be an airborne infantryman, paratrooper, 82nd, maybe someday in the Rangers and Special Forces and all that. And as I was getting ready to get commissioned, my professor of military science, who was the senior ROTC instructor there, called me in and said, "Well, congratulations, Cadet West. You're going to get a regular Army commission because most of the guys I was in school with got Army Reserve commit, hence the term Reserve Officer Training Corps. But there was a number that would get would get regular Army." And I was fortunate enough to get selected. But by the way, I had turned my grade point average around at this point in time. Good. So that was kind of a wake-up call. So things were a lot better. But so he said, "Congratulations, you've been selected for a regular Army commission in the Quartermaster Corps." And I go, "The what?" He said, "The Quartermaster Corps." And he was a transportation officer, which is part of the logistics business as well. And he was offended from my reaction because I was, I did not know, you didn't know much about the Army at that stage of your career. I hadn't even technically gone in the Army yet. And here I was kind of bad-mouthing this, what in the heck is the Quartermaster Corps? Kicked me out of his office, and I went forth and became a Army quartermaster. And quartermasters are principally the supply folks that do all the supply functions. They do other things, and there's a total of, I think it's 9 battlefield functions that quartermasters do, from supply to aerial delivery, food service. But it isn't the sexy. I
was going to say kind of
Clint Eastwood. Walking into the barracks and ripping an ear ring out of a guy. Infantry type. They don't make a lot of movies about quartermaster.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like you were kind of one of the behind the scenes guys that really did everything that needed to be done, so that. And very very important work, and we did our work in the same battle space, particularly in these later wars. The notion quartermasters were kind of rear echelon guys in World War II and in Vietnam. They weren't on the front line, so to speak. Well, for the wars, these forever wars that we fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were no front lines. Everybody was in the battle space. And as I was telling you earlier, I always like to make this distinction because I wouldn't want to mislead your listeners of Scott West walking through Baghdad with a bayonet attached to his M4 or whatever. That was not the case. Infantrymen, tankers, our armor folks, artillerymen, sometimes engineers, certainly our aviation forces, the Army aviation folks, they go outside of the wire is the term we use. They leave the safe space of a forward operating base with the purpose of having a presence in hostile territory. And that presence might be to make buddies with the local nationals, or it could be to seek out and destroy the enemies that would do us harm, right? But that's what an infantryman does. He's out there looking for, he or she, and of course there are a number, the combat arms of all of our branches have been integrated now with both men and women. So they go out looking for the enemy. I went outside the wire a lot, almost every day when I was in Iraq, and I got shot at a lot. But I'm out there trying to stay away from the enemy so that I can do my job as a logistician. And my job was to make sure that the infantrymen and the tankers had the fuel and ammunition, everything they needed,
water, maintenance support that they needed to keep their machines moving and all that. And so that's my story. But I think it's important for your listeners to know that. So,
Scott, there's been a lot of talk in recent years about the armed, and I won't just say the Army, I'll say the armed services. But at one point we were don't ask, don't tell. And then, just all the DEI stuff and now obviously President Trump and I guess Pete Hegseth have come in and, they're trying to revert the armed services back to where they were before. What you've seen, did we get too far away from where we need to be for our armed services as far as someone who, as an entity that really can protect us and do the job it needs to do?
Absolutely. It's like a police force and a firefighting force in a city, and you get so busy, you're consuming all their hours on building personal relationships instead of learning how to execute the tactics, techniques, and procedures that is law enforcement.
What were some examples that you saw of where we were just going down the wrong path?
Well, this kind of happened. I retired in 2010, and so I didn't see too much of it through my career.
But you've obviously talked to people. You've heard things.
Sure.
I mean, what are some of the examples you heard where you're just thinking, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I'm going to pick on the Navy for
Please.
a second. And if this pisses off some of your listeners, I'm sorry. I'm just going to piss them off. The Navy was, with our ships at sea, guaranteeing the freedom of navigation on the high seas that we talked about.
Right.
How important this was. And yet there were a number of ships that were hosting drag queen drag shows. It got so bad in the Navy that they literally, and you can look this up, Dr. Google will answer this for you. The Navy had an official drag queen, a petty officer. I think he's in E6. A petty officer, first class, I think, is in E6. Just one rank below chief petty officer. And this guy was I don't know if he was gay or transgender or all of the above, but he was certainly into the drag queen scene. And
so for real, rather than just like, because I could envision, young guys blowing off steam, having some fun, dressing up, and everybody just hooting and hollering. I mean, doing it for fun, one thing. This was more than that.
Well, and then for the Navy to have officially sanctioned a drag queen, it was just it was DEI gone really, really bad, right? And the whole DEI thing, I think, as it laid out, it was probably a really good idea in the beginning when people were saying, "Hey, we're going to ramp up our making sure that we have indeed equal opportunity," and that. But when the organization starts turning on itself, and I have said this for all through the time you heard the term DEI, this was a war on white males, white Christian males in particular. I mean, there was no shortage of people that were out there trying to make white, faithful Christian men feel bad about being white, Christian, and male, as opposed to focusing on trying to make equal opportunities not become equal outcomes. And we hear that term left and right. But equal opportunities, which I think the armed forces over the years have led society in a lot of, from desegregating and I think most people would realize that the U.S. military had been pretty doggone successful by societal norms, that we had become a force with equal opportunities, a place where anybody could go and be successful regardless of their gender, the color of their skin, or their religion.
But understanding too the objective, right? I mean, we're talking about war and defending our country and all that, and you would think that would be the one area where we wouldn't push so hard to be, pushing DEI, because
you have a military, as crass as this sounds, you have a military for three reasons. One is to deter war, and you do that by demonstrating your strength. And the second, that if the deterrence fails, you have people who can kick down doors and kill people. And as sad as that might sound, people, this warmonger West is on the radio talking about killing people. Well, that's why we have a military, and all the reason in the world to do your deterrence mission really well so we don't get anybody killed. You know, if you were really good at what you do, you don't ever have to worry about fighting because nobody's going to mess with you.
Trump talks a lot about peace through strength.
Sure, and that's exactly what it is. And yet, and I'm going to use this term during the Biden years, you know, when Trump was the president first time, and I got to tell you, I am not a huge Donald Trump fan.
Okay.
I like a lot of the things he's doing. I don't particularly like the way he's doing them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think he should be much more gentlemanly, forceful, yes, but a little more presidential and
Diplomatic.
that's just Scott West's humble opinion. But I like what he is achieving, particularly in turning this military thing around, because I did see our military during the Biden administration was losing its edge, the eye of the tiger. We were people before Biden was the president. Nobody messed with us.
Mm.
Xi was afraid to mess with us. I mean, they're always messing around on the margins. But when Joe Biden was the president, everybody messed with us. And
what was your reaction? What were your thoughts? What were your feelings with that debacle of getting out of Afghanistan and people hanging from planes and left behind, and I mean all the equipment? I mean billions of dollars. I mean,
well, the benchmark up until that time, and you may, how old are you?
55.
What a coincidence! I used to be 55. Growing up in the post-Vietnam, I went in the Army in '76, and there was as we came out, brought the last of our forces out of Vietnam in '75, and we were evacuating people who had been had worked for the U.S. government, Vietnamese citizens. There was an iconic picture of a Army helicopter being pushed over the side of an aircraft carrier because it was not that there was anything wrong with the helicopter, but it had been ferrying people back and forth from the mainland out to the ship, and that at a point in time, that mission was done. You had to make room for the next helicopter, and they were pushing America's helicopters into the ocean. And that becomes an icon of how not to leave a country, but they didn't have a whole lot of choice. When we came out of Afghanistan, we had all kinds of choices. Hell, we'd already been there 20 years. So if it took us a full year to plan an orderly withdrawal, what's a 21st year as long as you're working hard to not get anybody killed?
Right.
But we lost 13 people through the absolute negligence of a Department of Defense and a commander-in-chief who made bad decisions and could see as plain as the nose on their face that this was going to be nobody could predict the death of those 13, but all of the conditions for this to go bad were all in place. And number one, when they made the decision, and Lloyd Austin, Secretary Austin, was an old friend of mine. We'd served, had gone in the Army at the same time, and we'd served at Fort Bragg together and up in the Pentagon. Love him to death, but this was just the decision to withdraw out of Kabul, which was the command center, the cultural center of Taliban, as opposed to doing it 70 or 80 miles away. I forget what the distance is between Kabul in downtown, or the Kabul airport, Karzai airport in downtown Kabul, and the U.S.-held airport in Bagram, Afghanistan. But we could have made a much more orderly and just a little bit of planning could have prevented that whole debacle, to include the equipment. and a conscious decision of which equipment you would want to leave behind. But, we left really sophisticated equipment behind. And a lot of Americans say, oh, we left this equipment behind, and now they're going to use it on us. Well, the Taliban's never going to have the kind of national reach that we have to where they could attack anything more than a terrorist type attack into this country. It's not like there's going to be a ship landing down here at Wilmington, North Carolina, and offloading Taliban forces. But the optics of it, and the more than just the optics, those 13 that we lost, just absolutely unnecessary. And then the administration reacted like, well, that's the cost of doing business. Right. What's the cost of doing business when you do it really poorly, when you plan poorly, when you execute poorly, when you don't really have a plan at all? The president tells the Secretary of Defense, we're coming out of Afghanistan. We're going to do it by the 13th of July of 2023, 2022. I forget what. It's been 4 years, I think. But
Trump has renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War. Do you like it?
It is one of the dumbest things Donald Trump has done. Stupid.
Why?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. And I'm not saying he's dumb. First of all, it was very unnecessary. Going back to why we have a military, our Constitution, not one of the amendments, in the base of our Constitution, we are to provide for the common defense, right? And you defend the several states with a capability that deters war and says to your enemies, not today, Elroy. And I use that term Elroy because it translates into the king, right? So a message to the king is don't come mess with us today. Because if you mess with us, we'll have something for you and you'll regret having attacked us.
Again, peace through strength.
It's peace through strength. And so we are providing for the common defense. We are not going out making war on the rest of the world. We're doing everything we can to prevent war, American wars, as well as to prevent wars in other countries.
Yeah, the Department of War makes it seem like you're looking for war.
Yeah.
It's like, we want to fight. And
the other thing, the reason I say it's kind of dumb, is because it doesn't make any difference what you call it. Mm-hmm. It's your actions that count. Does the U.S. military have a well-defined mission and a well-defined budget so they can accomplish that mission? The whole of government is responsible, and the president is held by law to put together the national security strategy. And this is the strategy of the United States of how we're going to secure this country and all of our vital interests, both in the country and outside of the country. And so there are various components to that national security strategy, including Department of Defense authors the National Defense Strategy, which is the war fighting capabilities of the strategy that says, here's how we're going to have a very credible, very capable deterrence force. And so we don't have a national war strategy. It's not like we're saying, well, we're going to declare war on Canada, and when we're done with them, we'll take on Mexico. Then the rest of Central America better war. This is kind of like what Hitler was doing in World War II. He had a clear strategy. He was going to go make war no matter what. Mm-hmm. In 1938-39, when he annexed Austria, he was not going to make war with Austria. He was prepared to, but they were Germans. And his argument was, I'm trying to bring them back in to the German fold under the Nazi flag, and he was successful at doing that. And then we're going into the Sudetenland in Bohemia, in what is today the Czech Republic, and we're going to bring them in. Why? Because they're Germans. But when we get to Poland, they're just a bunch of Untermenschen. We're going to attack and kill them. We're going to make war on Poland. And then we're going to go after Russia, and we're going to go after the French. And this was all about, that's not the United States at all. And so I think that in 1947, when the National Defense Act of 1947 converted the Department of War to the Department of Defense, and it created the Air Force, and it created some other capabilities. The Joint Chiefs of Staff came out of that. That was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think defense sounds a lot better. Just from aesthetic isn't the right word, but it sounds more reasonable, right?
Yeah.
We're going to defend ourselves. We're not going to just be warmongers.
It's important, though, to note to our enemies, we are going to defend ourselves, and we're going to defend our vital interests in other places outside of our own borders.
Of course.
You can't live in Fortress U.S. You have to have influence, and your security is built upon where you invest outside of your walls. In siege warfare, and I define myself as a student of history, every army that was ever taken under siege eventually loses, unless the attackers just finally go, we've had Lynchburg under siege for 8 years, and it's just not worth it any longer. And turn around, and go home.
Gotcha.
But if you, so this you have to, you can't have a siege mentality. And I get the whole idea with the wall on the Mexican border. That's as much symbolic as it is anything else, really. To secure the United States, you've got to have a good relationship with the Mexican government, a good relationship, Canadian government, a strong NATO, and as Trump has shown what a lot of people think is his attack on NATO, he has really done a lot to strengthen NATO. And I will tell you why that's really important. Scott West, humble opinion. Every alliance that we have ever formed anywhere in the world that was worthy of the term alliance has started and stopped in Europe. We don't go into Central Asia and bring in Uzbekistan and Afghanistan and Tajikistan and form because we don't have that kind of influence. And frankly, they don't have the kind of capabilities that we would need to form an alliance with them. And so every alliance that we've ever had that was worthy of the term alliance has been European based. And so to for us to say, well, if we're going to secure the United States of America the way we need to, whether you want to call it Department of War, Department of Defense, we need a strong NATO. We don't need NATO to collapse, and we dang sure don't need to pull out of it. But Trump has, through threats of action, and people know that he will do what he says he's going to do, has brought them to the table, particularly funding what they were supposed to be paying all along, and in some cases now they're paying more.
Yeah.
This war, in watching Putin attack Ukraine, is a real wake-up call for Europe, because the Europeans know that Putin doesn't care. He has lost thousands upon thousands of Russian soldiers. Doesn't care.
Doesn't care. Yeah.
It is good for him as long as he keeps his oligarchs happy. He can just keep doing that. Now, at some point in time, he runs out of people. And I don't know if you know this, but the population of the United States is about 350 million people, plus or minus, right? You know what the population of Russia is?
No.
About 190 million.
Oh, wow.
So he's going to have a manpower problem here. But for right now, it's okay. And I don't think he wants to make peace under any circumstances with with Ukraine, and it's getting a lot of attention from the Europeans because they
it's so close.
Flew drones over into Poland over the weekend, and he's kind of keeping everybody on their toes over there. So.
Scott, we have a few minutes left, and where I'm not going to use the word celebrating, but remembering 9/11.
Sure.
And it feels like, like most things, the further we get away from it, the easier it is to forget. But, you'll never forget. And I'd heard that you were in the Pentagon on that day, and I got to hear that story.
Sure. So I was a colonel serving on the Army staff at the Department of the Army headquarters there in the Pentagon, and I was the executive officer to an Army 3-star general who was the chief of logistics, right? So he was the guy responsible for policy and programming for all things logistically related. Wonderful man, Lieutenant General Chuck Mahan. He's gone now, sadly. He was claimed last year by Agent Orange-related illnesses based on his time in Vietnam. But at any rate, we were in General Mahan's office. I was on literally the second day in the job. I'd signed into the Army staff on the 10th of September, so the 11th of September. We were in his office about 8 in the morning in a meeting, got an alert from the Army Ops Center that there had been an aircraft accident up in New York. And we tuned in to one of the news stations, one of the national news, and we're watching, at this point, what was film footage of this plane flying into, it had some film footage apparently of from a security camera on a building that they were showing on TV, and it showed the plane flying in, and of course, smoke billowing out of the North Tower. And there was some speculation that it could have been an aviation accident, navigational error, some navigational piece of equipment failed. Well, about that time, here came the second aircraft into the South Tower, which eliminated all doubt. I can remember my boss just looking, shaking his head, and he said, "There will be hell to pay for this." It was probably another 20 minutes or so before we were sitting there watching the television, and we heard his secretary scream. She was standing, we were on the E-ring of the Pentagon, the outermost ring. She was standing in a little cubby hole where there was a copy machine, and as she was making copies of something flashed. She looked out just in time to see that airplane coming in down off the hill by where the Air Force Memorial is. If you've been up there, the Air Force Memorial wasn't there at that point in time, but it came down from up near the Navy Annex and Henderson Hall up on the hill above the Pentagon, and it pancaked into the ground. Then we felt a huge thud. And in short order, there was a loud explosion. And that the point of impact of that flight was about 100 yards away from where we were standing.
Wow.
So immediately, the emergency evacuation system kicked in, and with flashing lights and sirens and automated voice activated messaging system that said, evacuate the building. So my boss said, West, you go that way and make sure all of our teammates get out. We had about 200 and some, a little over 200 people that worked in the Army G4 and Army logistics. And I'm going to go this way, and we'll meet out at our assembly area, which we were very good at, because every quarter or so we would practice. We would have fire drills, and anybody new that signed in, part of their in processing, they would be shown where our assembly area was, what their escape route was, and so we were very well trained on how to evacuate the building, and we would go out for the quarterly fire drills prior to 9/11. Everybody get accounted for, and then you'd head back in, get back to work. Well, none of us ever rehearsed what do we do in the real thing if you can't go back in the building, if the building's uninhabitable. Of course, that is what happened on 9/11. So, and by the way, in the Army G4, we didn't lose anyone. We were very, very fortunate. We did have one lady that was injured, had a leg injury trying to get out of the building. And I don't want to oversell this. It's not like we were crawling out of wreckage, but we were getting people out of an area where the sprinklers had been activated. And to make sure that we got them all going in the right direction. We all got out, realized we couldn't get back in the building. Finally, my boss said, "Scott, I'm going back in. You stay here and account for all these people, and then send them home to stand by their phones and wait for their orders," because none of us really knew what to do at that point in time. Now, getting them home, we walked over to, we were out in South Parking, which is just sun-drenched, and it's a pretty hot day. And so we needed to get into some shade before we had a bigger health problem on our hands. And so we walked over to a place called Pentagon Row, and I briefed our people. I said, you need to go home the best way you can. Now, a lot of people had driven, and a lot of people had ridden the metro in, and a few people had ridden buses in. Well, at the time of the plane crash, the FBI had declared the scene a crime scene. And so there's no movement of cars in or out of the parking lot. There's nobody coming in or out of the building. The metro is not stopping. The train system is not stopping at the Pentagon any longer. The buses aren't running, and you've got 25,000 people that are trying to get home. So it brought out the absolute best in humanity. People were stopping. People on I-95 were stopping and picking total strangers up,
Really?
and taking them to their homes. There were other people who, very few people had cell phones in 2001. And oh, by the way, one of the first things that happened was the cellular network was brought down so that the terrorists couldn't use our own cell network to coordinate attacks, right? So you got all these people out here. None of them can call their family members to let them know what their status is. No Ubers in those days, and yet everybody figured out a way to get home. And people taking care of one another. And my brother-in-law lives 3 blocks over here. I'll go borrow his car and deliver people to their houses. And that sort of stuff was happening all over the city. So I had most everybody accounted for. We had 2 people I didn't know where they were. It turned out they'd been in a meeting on the other side of the Pentagon, brand new, did not know where our assembly area was. They eventually got home and called in. And then somebody said, "I've got a signal," and he had a cell phone, and people lined up to borrow the cell phone to make a 15-second phone call, and I finally got my turn on the phone, and I dialed my home phone, phone rang one time. My wife picked up the phone and said, West? And she's always called me by my last name. I don't even know if she knows what my first name is, but it works for us. She goes, West? And I said, yeah, it's me. But I said, how did you know it was me? And she said, I don't know. I just somehow knew that. And then she said, but, everybody else who has our number has already called 3 times. And I had a daughter in college at Carolina at that time, and she was beside herself and calling home.
And they all knew you were at the Pentagon.
Yeah, they all knew I was at Pentagon. Had another daughter who was in middle school in Alexandria, where we lived, and they all let the kids out early to get home with their families, and
so you were 100 yards away from where that plane hit.
Yeah, and sadly, there were a whole lot of people a lot closer, and so that night I'm helping to get people home. I finally I let Patty know that I was alive, and that was a jubilant moment. Nothing jubilant, but our hearts are pounding, and,
of course,
and people are breathing again in the West family. And I didn't get home till about 10 o'clock at night because I was doing my part, even though I couldn't get my car, ushering people to places and making coordination for people to get home. And I got home about 10 o'clock at night, exhausted. And about 11, my phone rings. And keep in mind, in the Pentagon, we used to come dressed in slacks and low quarter shoes and a dress shirt. This was a uniform, Army uniform. We called it a Class B uniform. But it was a dress affair. So the phone rings about 11 o'clock at night, and this voice at the other end was calling me from the Army Operations Center. Said, Colonel West, you were to report to the Pentagon at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning in battle dress uniform.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, wow, okay. And it was very clear that we were at war, and it was very clear that the Army was changing its mindset, that to be for these office pogues up in the world's largest office building to be coming to work in battle dress sent a big signal.
Yeah.
And mindset to them is we're at war, whether this is the Pearl Harbor of our generation, and like it or not, we're there. And so keep in mind, my car's locked up in South Parking as part of a crime scene, and my wife had a car, and so she drove me up I-95 and across the Beltway and up to the Pentagon and dropped me off on I-395 on this overpass that kind of set up above the Pentagon. And she waited there. I crawled over the guardrail and down into South Parking. And of course, there were people everywhere heading into the building. And she said that night, she said it was just surreal. She said, I sitting there watching my husband walk into a building that people should have been evacuating, but you guys are going in. So we get down into the Army Operations Center down in the basement, and there's going to be a briefing right at 6 o'clock. And I'm expecting this to be a briefing on the status of the Pentagon, how many people we've lost, how the firefighting effort's going, what we're doing to establish essential services, all those things. None of that. The briefing was the war plan for the invasion of Afghanistan. And the light bulb came on that said those bastards that attacked my country did not shut the Pentagon down for even a day. And during the night, the Army planners at work start planning the who, what, where, when, and how of how we're going to put combat forces into Iraq or into Afghanistan with the express purpose of, number one, we're going to go destroy Al-Qaeda. Number two, we're going to kill or capture Osama bin Laden. And number three, we're going to punish the Taliban for having hosted them. We introduced forces in late October of 2001. Don't hold me to these dates. And by the 12th of December, we had almost accomplished all of our missions. We certainly had destroyed Al-Qaeda's capabilities at that point. We'd severely punished the Taliban. And we had Osama bin Laden on the 12th of December of 2001. We had him trapped in a place called Tora Bora Mountain Complex. It was described as he was in a tunnel complex up on this mountain, and we let him go. And the argument was that, this tunnel complex would have required infantrymen to go in. We would have got a lot of people killed. And, well, that's just bullshit. Forgive me. I'm not supposed to use language like that anymore. When I became a general officer, I was told I shouldn't. So what I meant to say was it's horseshit.
That's much better.
It was just an excuse to fail on the part of our national command authority to allow this guy. We had him trapped. We'd already lost a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, getting to this point where we had him trapped, and this business of a tunnel complex. Well, this tunnel complex was probably smaller than this building, this office that we're sitting in. I mean, it wasn't like it was 100 miles of underground tunnels. None of that. It would not. And after what we did in Iraq here a couple months ago, not Iraq, but Iran, dropping bunker busters for deep penetration. We had that capability back in 2001, and we certainly could have taken him out that way and not lost a single ground soldier. But we let him out, and then we got into these doggone forever wars, and of course you know the history of that. Mm-hmm. Iraq is a place we never should have been, had no business going in there, none whatsoever. Still to this day, we went in on a lie, and lost a lot of real good people. Very briefly, back to 9/11, and I know what we've run over, but I promised myself many years ago that I would never talk about 9/11 without mentioning four names of people I knew, some better than others. But on that day, we lost Major Cliff Patterson. Truth be known, I knew Cliff's wife, who was a serving captain in the Army. She has since retired as a colonel. But we lost Cliff Patterson. We lost a friend of mine by the name of Neil Highland. Neil, given name Stephen, but went by his middle name Neil. We lost him on 9/11. We lost a guy that I was very close with over the years. I'd served in Operation Desert Storm with him, by the name of Steve Long. We used to call him Ranger Long. Steve had been an enlisted Ranger and had served in Grenada during Operation Urgent Fury, and he was a Desert Storm veteran, and sadly he was killed on 9/11 as well. And then there was a retired Army colonel by the name of Rick Rescorla, who had these doggone Dos Equis beer commercials. Mm-hmm. I guess I shouldn't be mentioning product name, but the most interesting man in the world. Yeah. Rick Rescorla may well have been the most interesting man in the world. Born and raised in South Africa, had fought wars in Africa as a young soldier, migrated to the UK, went in the British Army, served there. Then he came to the United States, took a commission in the United States Army, went to Vietnam, served as an infantryman in the 1st Cavalry Division in the first major battle of the war, major land battle in the war in Vietnam, which was the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley in November of 1965. And you may remember the movie We Were Soldiers.
Yeah.
This was Mel Gibson playing the part of then Lieutenant Colonel, now Lieutenant General deceased Hal Moore. Hal Moore, who was the battalion commander at the very centerpiece, LZ X-ray, landing zone X-ray, described Rick Rescorla as the greatest platoon leader he ever saw.
Wow.
And Rescorla did a couple of tours of Vietnam and grows up, retires as a colonel, goes to work for Morgan Stanley as their chief of security. And on 9/11, he's the guy who insisted on doing fire evacuations from the tower, and had trained his people on how to conduct an orderly evacuation. So on 9/11, they're in the South Tower. North Tower has been hit. The corporate leadership of Morgan Stanley, and don't hold me to this, but the story is that the company was told to hold fast. Everybody was to stay at their desk and wait for their orders. And Rick Rescorla knew. He may not have known the exact right answer, but he knew it wasn't sitting in place waiting. And he is credited for having gotten 2,700.
Wow.
So we lost about 2,900 on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We could well have lost double that.
Wow.
But here's this guy who got his people out before the South Tower got hit, and then the last time he was seen was on the 42nd floor heading up to get more people out.
Man, there are so many stories like that when it comes to 9/11. I mean, it is.
Sure. And so, you know, can there be anything sadder than lives cut short and the hopes and dreams of families not fulfilled? And the answer that I always give is yes, there is something sadder than that. And that is if we forget, if we fail to recognize them. So this is the reason why I take these 4 guys. I picked them because I happen to know them, and I look at their pictures quite often, and I ask the people that I have the opportunity to remember them.
Well, thank you for sharing the story.
Sure.
And, you know, one thing that I wanted to touch on, too, before we wrapped up, and again, always appreciate your time. But you're retired now, sort of, but still helping veterans. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
I'm going to brag a little bit, and I'm not a big bragging kind of guy, but I'll brag on this a little bit. That, you know, a lot of people talk about when they retire, they're going to give back. Then they buy the fishing boat and the ski vacations, and they forget about that. Well, I'm giving back. As I told you early on, I became a major general in the Army by being surrounded by really good people, having some of the finest people America had to offer worked for me, and people that I worked for, and they carried me to a level in the Army that I could have never gotten to with my own raw talent. And so I said, if ever I'm in a position financially and that I am going to figure out a way to give back. So the way I've decided to do that, since I can't pay back most of those people I served with, many of them are gone now, is to do the best I can for our veterans. And I don't know what you know about the Department of Veterans Affairs disability benefits program. But there's nothing simple or easy about it. And navigating the system can be very challenging. So I have trained to be an accredited service officer with the American Legion. My accreditation comes from the VA. And what that does is that allows me to be able to look into a veteran's file to be able to help coach them on how to put together claims. And the VA has two principal responsibilities to veterans and their disability claims. One is, and by default, because I'm an accredited service officer, these duties accrete to me as well. One is a duty to inform. So I have the duty to inform a veteran on what's required to put together a substantial claim. And then a duty to assist. And that is the duty to assist them in gathering the medical evidence and any other evidence required to get that claim substantiated.
That's got to be so helpful for them.
Well, I think it is. And my clients, by the way, I do it free of charge. I've had clients say, I'll buy you a bottle of whiskey. No, I don't accept any gifts. I had one guy.
Not even whiskey?
I'm sorry?
Not even whiskey?
No. I like a little bourbon. I like a little scotch too, but it's something I reserve as a little present to myself on the weekends. Yeah, on the weekends.
What's your favorite bourbon?
Blanton's. I can name a bunch of them, but in terms of the day-to-day, the kind of affordable bourbon that tastes really good, I have I like Woodford Reserve Double Oaked.
Yeah.
That's a little pricey.
I just finished a bottle last night.
Well, there you go. That's and believe it or not, my go-to scotch, and I'm not a big scotch drinker, but I do like it as a change-up every now and again. The go-to scotch is a Balvenie Doublewood. And this is a 12-year-old scotch that was cured in a American oak barrel. And these are used bourbon barrels, by the way. So they cured it for 6 years, and then it gets moved over into a sherry cask for 6 years. And it's got just a delightful flavor. And I like it for the flavor. I certainly limit my intake.
Yes.
But just very briefly back to the veterans. So I'm pretty adamant about not accepting.
Right.
Certainly there's no charge, but it is very rewarding to help. I've got veterans that I'll sit down and say, "Do you have a VA.gov account? You have an online account with the VA?" And these guys look at me and say, "Sonny, I don't even have a cell phone." He does. Or I'll say, "Do you have a computer?" No. My nephew Billy comes over and does all my computer work for me. So, and these are smart people. They're good people. They just haven't embraced that kind of technology.
Sure.
And they're some of the happiest people I know because their lives aren't encumbered by that technology. And so it's a delight to help a veteran get the benefits that they deserve. Because in a lot of cases, it's about justice. We sent America's youth to Vietnam, had no business being there either. None. And we lost 58,000 of them. And we've poisoned the shit out of the ones that were there, and they're still dying from these diseases. And so you can't buy back your health, but you can buy justice for them. And so this is important for them, and it's therefore important for me. So,
well, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for what you continue to do.
Yes, sir.
And thank you for your time today. This was great.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a privilege to be here and to meet you. And if you want, I'll debate Steve Bozeman anywhere. No, I love Steve to death.
Oh, boy.
I love Steve to death. In fact, Steve and I mix it up. I go down to Monument Terrace. I'm down there probably on average of once a month. He's down there every Friday.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
And we visit down there. And Steve's granddaughter used to live about, we live out in the country in Appomattox County. His granddaughter lived about half a mile from our place, so I'd see him out there every now and again. But they've moved on from there. But yeah, this is it's a lot of fun to poke fun, but ultimate respect for those guys.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah,
no question. Retired Major General Scott West joining me on No Holds Barred. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.